Hey there, fellow classic comic collectors. As always, I'm Scott Harris King, and today's a little kung fu move. As always, I'm Scott Harris King, and today I'm back with what nobody's demanding, least of all myself. It's the next part of my Avengers run. Yes, I love the Avengers. Yes, it's cool to have a complete run. Yes, I enjoy showing off my comics. No, this particular part of the run is not good. Now, we're going to be covering issues 301 to 350. And last time I went in insane detail about how editorial malfeasance basically ended the Avengers' 25-year run of greatness. And that's all gone. So with issue 300, you may remember last time we had Walt Simonson had just spent 10 issues, almost an entire year, setting up what he was going to do in the book, getting rid of the old team, bringing in the new team, getting everything set up, and then immediately left the book because the higher up at editorial said he couldn't actually use the characters he had planned his whole arc around. So he went off the Fantastic Four, and what we have is a bunch of fill-ins to start with. So starting with 301, there's a three-parter, the Supernova Saga. Ralph Macchio. We do get one good thing here. Long-term penciler Paul Ryan comes on board. John Buscema's gone, which is not the good part. But Tom Palmer stays, and with Paul Ryan's very solid draftsmanship, Tom Palmer does his usual Tom Palmering of everything, and so the book maintains its feel in terms of the art. It's just that the stories don't really even remember this story, to be honest. Get a one shot with the UFOs here. And then with 305, there was some fanfare about this. John Byrne took over as the writer. Now, I think he was writing West Coast Avengers around the same time. I forget if it was at the same time, but he was still a big deal at this point. This was after he had done the Superman reboot at DC, and he comes back to Marvel after that, takes over Avengers, and does absolute nothing with it. Now, my copy of this is signed by artist Paul Ryan. I'm going to have a story about that, which I'll tell in a few issues. This is a resetting of the lineup. As I mentioned, Simonson had put together this crazy new lineup with Mr. Fantastic and the Invisible Woman and Gilgamesh, the Forgotten One. And we never figured out why any of that happened because he left the book immediately. So in this issue, Captain America calls this big meeting, and here's a cool double-page splash where all the Avengers, including reservists, people like Hellcat, who hasn't been in the comic for 15 years, everybody shows up for this meeting where they're going to figure out who's going to be on what team, who's going to be reservists, and stuff like that. I enjoy those sort of procedural issues. I certainly enjoy it more than the actual stories. Byrne having a little fun bringing the Lava Men back for issue 305. Of course, they were in issue 5, so 300 issues later, they're back. But then the rest of this is just completely forgettable. I can say that with certainty because I have forgotten everything that happens in here. Here's Gilgamesh getting his butt kicked, and so he's basically out of the book at this point. But we do get Cersei is joining the team here, and that's going to become important because Cersei is going to be on the team for quite a while, and it's going to be the focus of a lot of the stories going forward. 310. These are all Byrne stories. Okay, then we get Acts of Vengeance. Now, this is fine as a crossover. A lot of people have really high, hold this to a really high standard. The Acts of Vengeance crossover. I'm not quite sure why. I didn't think it was that great. It was very disjointed, and as far as these company-wide crossovers go, And so the quality varies wildly depending on which book it's in. The Avengers issues are just okay. Here we have Hydra Base getting wrecked. This had been their temporary headquarters for a while after the mansion siege, and they're working on basically getting them back to the old status quo. So they're building like a new Avengers mansion, which they're going to have here. That's like a high-tech, modern version, and that lasts until issue 375. Spoiler alert, when an Avengers mansion from another alternate reality warps in. And so that allows them to bring the original mansion back after it had been destroyed in 277. But it's like Avengers Park, which is like a park with statues of the Avengers, trashed by Freedom Force. And you're kind of like, okay, Freedom Force does have the ability to trash a park, but they've got no ability to cause the Avengers any problems. So, and here's the Mandarin in his goofy armor phase. A classic Avengers villain, because he did show up in issues 19 and 20, but whatever. Burns' run ends with what's probably the best part of his run, short run, which is this multi-part storyline where everything in reality's existence starts to like disappear, and it turns out that we get this butt shot, classic through the legs, like James Bond poster, and it's Nebula. So Nebula's the big villain in this arc, which runs for 5 issues, and it also gets their Spider-Man. And Spider-Man comes along every once in a while. He'll show up in the book, but he's back for this storyline. And the Stranger is in this for some reason. And then 318 is the end of the Byrne run and the end of this storyline. So this storyline I remember thinking was pretty good. Now we're back to Nebula. This isn't Kang Nebula, and I still don't remember that ever being explained in the comics. There was a Kang crossover in some of the annuals. Eventually, when I get to the end of this, I'll show you the annuals. And maybe it was explained in that. I don't remember. I mean, that story wasn't very good either. But we're back to regular Nebula, not Kang Nebula. You can see that this is signed by Paul Ryan. Now, I've had several of these have been signed by Paul Ryan at different points. And here's my Paul Ryan story. 314 is the one that I have signed on the inside, another one on the inside, whereas this one's signed on the cover because he's local to my area. He's passed away a few years ago. But I used to see him at shows very regularly, and I used to have him sign a bunch of stuff. So I've got some more stuff coming up that he's signed. Every time he would be at a show, I'd have him sign like 1 or 2 books. And so over the course of time, I had him sign a number of things. But these initial books, the ones that are signed on the inside, when I was in high school, I think senior year of high school, there's a school not too far from where I lived that did night classes. And Paul Ryan taught a course on how to draw comic books. And so my parents paid to have me sign up for that. And so for a period of 6 or 8 weeks, I guess once a week I would drive out to this place, probably 8 weeks, and got to take classes from Paul Ryan, who at the time was, I don't remember if he was still on Avengers. He might have had just left Avengers and was doing Fantastic Four. Yeah, so this was a little bit after this. So he was doing Fantastic Four, I think, at the time. So it was after, it was a couple years after this. And pretty early on, I asked him about signing. Like I was like, after class, I waited and I was like, would it be okay if I brought something in to sign? And he was like, well, I'm here to teach, and maybe don't. He was basically like, when the course ends, the last day, if you want to bring something in, I'll sign something. And I felt like a complete jackass, but I felt better on the last day because I did bring a couple things in to have him sign it. And at the end of the class, I was not the only person that had brought stuff. There was actually several other people that had clearly asked him the same thing. So I didn't feel nearly as bad, because it was actually quite a few people that were waiting around to get stuff signed by him at the end of it. So somewhere in my stuff, I have my sketches and drawings and stuff from that class that includes sketches that he did. So we'd do layouts and stuff. We get homework. He'd give us Fantastic Four scripts that were current that he was working on. He'd give us like the first few pages, and we'd go home and we'd draw those, and then we'd bring in our pages, and then he'd tell us, like, he'd compare it to what he did in the same issue and give critiques and stuff. So it was really, really cool. But anyway, that's why I have so many of these signed by Paul Ryan. So Byrne leaves the book. We get the Crossing Line, 6-part story by Fabian. I don't know how to say his last name. Nasiza. I think I'm butchering that. And this is like it's got a Tuma. It's got underwater stuff. It's kind of like the Hunt for Red October, but in the Marvel universe. So the Soviet super soldiers, or whatever they're called at this point, are in here. And Alpha Flight, because there's like the Americans and the Russians and the Canadians. They all have their different teams involved. There's a bit of a goof up here on the cover. Maybe you can see here, maybe not. This here, it says part 4 of 6, right? The next issue also says part 4 of 6. I was very confused going through these, but I'm pointing this out for a reason, not just because it's silly. And then here's the last part of this. This was during a period where they were doing 2 issues a month during the summer. So like this one is listed as early October. And then the next issue is late October. Here's a Byrne cover where they're at a dinner party. Now, around this time, Larry Hama takes over the book. And Larry Hama was only on the book for a little bit, and he has a memorable storyline. It's the introduction of the man called Rage. I mean, so Rage is an interesting character in some ways. Basically, the conceit is he's a kid, and when he gets his superpowers, it gives him an adult body. So it gives him, he gives him the super strength and the super muscles and makes him really big. So he looks like and he sounds like an adult, but he's only 13. So it's sort of a play on the classic Billy Batson Captain Marvel thing. And at first the Avengers don't know he's a kid because he doesn't look like a kid, and he's basically calling out the Avengers for not having more black members. And I have mixed feelings about this, and mainly because, well, I do think there's definitely a value to this kind of storyline. As a fan of the team, it was frustrating for the team to be sort of called out on the carpet for systematic racism or systemic racism, institutionalized racism, when the institution that's racist is not the Avengers, it's Marvel Comics, right? So, the reason they don't have more black members on the Avengers is because people at Marvel Comics had not created more black superheroes, right? So, it's tricky because, there's no explanation for that in the Marvel Universe. So in the Marvel Universe, Rage is like, why are there, aren't there more black superheroes? And the Avengers are like, well, we're not racist. We have mutants, we have aliens, we have people that are blue skinned, we don't care. And he's like, yeah, but why aren't there any black people on the team? And they're like, which good question. Wow, we feel really bad. And I think there would have been a more interesting way to do this. You could do a storyline where you investigate why in the Marvel Universe, why more black Americans who have powers maybe don't choose to become superheroes. That's an angle that I think would be really interesting. And you could have something where maybe they try and recruit some people to become superheroes. I don't know. But as it is, I don't know. It felt weird. Because really what Larry Hama is calling out was the industry, but because it's in the story, it ends up just kind of not working really for me. Here's a cool cover signed by Paul Ryan. This is one of these Avengers, assembling the new line of the Old Order Changeth issues, right? Which I'm a fan of as an Avengers fan. There's certain callback to the classic cover of issue 221 with the Time magazine cover, Who Will Be the Avengers, which had like a grid. But here we got Captain America doing a press conference. I always like this cover. Basically, Rage and Spider-Man and Sandman, not the DC Sandman from the Endless, but the actual Sand guy from Spider-Man. They all become Avengers reservists, and I thought this was cool. And eventually, this plays out over in the pages of Amazing Spider-Man, where for some reason Sandman has to like do some sort of like villain mission or something, and Spider-Man and Sandman both eventually end up quitting the team as part of that. But here's a wackadoodle end of the run for Hama. It's the Tetrarchs of Entropy. And this is a little storyline that runs for a few issues. And then there's a two-parter where there's another dinner party. So we just had a dinner party in issue 325. But here's another dinner party, which has a confrontation in it between Doctor Doom and Rage. So, not the Avengers' finest hour. None of this is. At best, these rise to the level of being forgettable and mediocre. Most of them aren't like terrible, but there's some of them just aren't very good. As a reader, I thought that issues 301 up to this point, 333, were not great. Definite low point. I thought that this next storyline picked up a little bit. Still not great, but better than what we've been getting for the past 3 years. It's called The Collection Obsession and introduces Thane Ector. Now this is an Andy Kubert cover. The rest of these are Ron Lim covers. And this didn't feel very Avengers to me. There's something about this that just... There's the stuff on the moon, and there's these aliens coming, and the feel of it was written differently. It just felt a little bit off for me compared to what I was used to in Avengers, but it was pretty good, particularly compared to what we had been getting. It was pretty solid stuff, and we get inside here. We have Steve Epting takes over the book. They have written his name wrong. But the other thing that's important here, there's several things. Bob Harris comes in as the writer, and after this arc, there's going to be a few like fill-ins by other people, but Bob Harris is basically taking over as the new Avengers writer. He's going to be a long-term writer, so he's an important figure. We're going to talk about some here. Steve Epting takes over, and Steve Epting is going to be their penciler for a long time, and he's excellent. Particularly with Palmer doing his inks, it looks a lot like John Buscema, and so it's got a great feel. This, where they are first getting into the rhythm, is weird, because this is Steve Epting pencils when he's very early in his career, and the inking. Take a look at the art here. It's weird, right? Because it does actually look kind of like Ron Lim, who did the cover. But what's weird is the inkers on this is the craziest inking team, one of the craziest I've seen. It's the combination of Tom Palmer and Tony DeZuniga. I have no idea where they came up with that, and the result does not look remotely like either of them. So I don't know what was happening there. But this storyline is pretty good. Here's part 3. Part 4. Now remember, we had that issue where they did the part 4 twice in the last big that last big 6-parter. So here we have part 4, right? Well, guess what? The next issue also is part 4 again. I don't know why they're having so much trouble with that. But finally, 339. I remember this not ending as well as it started, which happens a lot. 340, fill-in issue by Scott Lobdell. And then we have a crossover with New Warriors, where Rage, I don't remember if he's already joined the New Warriors or if he joins in this, but it's got the Sons of the Serpent, and this storyline's okay. I don't remember a lot about it, but I remember thinking it was okay. And then we get into the important part. Here we go. Kicking things off. This is where the book takes a turn. 343. We got Steve Epting pencils with Tom Palmer in full effect, giving us our best John Buscema looking comic. We got Bob Harris starts his big epic here. It's the first issue of the Gatherers storyline. Now, the Gatherers starts in issue 343 and runs to issue 375. It's not every issue, but it's like an ongoing building plot and subplot that comes around to the foreground and circles around from here for the next basically 2.5 years of the book, over 30 issues. And Steve Epting is really good in this. He's still young, but I remember feeling like, okay, the book's starting to get better. It's not reaching the heights that it used to reach before issue 300, but it's definitely getting better, and the art's getting better. And then we immediately get interrupted by Operation Galactic Storm, a 19-part epic that ran through all these different titles. I used to have all of them, but I've sold some of them recently, so I need to pick them back up. This story is actually pretty good, but it's way too long and bloated, and like it crosses over into all these titles like Wonder Man, anything that has anything to do with the Avengers, and so some of the crossover, some of the issues, but it's not like you can skip those because they're numbered, they're part of the thing, and you have to get them. So here's the final issue, 347. This is the famous issue where Iron Man leads a team of Avengers to kill the Supreme Intelligence. And Captain America has a team of Avengers where they stand against them, and they have this big debate that splits the team. There's also part 20 in Captain America number 401, which is really good, sort of epilogue. But important storyline in the MCU, building the rest of the Marvel Universe, what happens after this is Civil War, very important, and what happens in the movies. 348, also important. I talked last time about how John Byrne destroyed the Vision, and we've had this White Vision who has no emotions and is a robot and is a useless freaking character. This is the issue where they start to try and drag that back. They did a little bit in Solo Avengers number 40, or Avenger Spotlight 40, which is a Roy Thomas story. But they pick up from that here, and we get the storyline where the Vision, this is actually building off of Avenger Spotlight 40. Some of the stuff in there where Vision had some new brain patterns added to give him a personality again. And so he starts to exhibit emotions again here. And then we get an issue where the gods are messing around with Hercules that I didn't really care for. And then we get this was a weird one. It's 350. The Starjammers show up, and some of them are, now I think of them, I always thought of them as good guys, but some of the Starjammers, unbeknownst to the others, have secretly taken an assassination job to kill the Black Knight, because the Black Knight is the person that actually killed the Supreme Intelligence. And so some of the surviving Kree have put a hit out on him, and the Starjammers are the ones that show up to murder him. And so that plays out in this issue here. Now, Bob Harris, at the time he was writing this, you may remember last time we had a big conflict of interest between books, because Mark Grunwald was writing Captain America and editing Avengers, and so he was doing things in Avengers as an editor to boost Captain America. Well, we get something that's the reverse here. Bob Harris was writing Avengers, but he was the editor of the X-Men books at the time. And so you definitely get a thing with Bob Harris going on where he's making the Avengers as much like the X-Men as he can. He's bringing in the love triangles and the soap opera stuff that he sets up with Crystal and Cersei and the Black Knight have this love triangle. He gives them the infamous Avengers jackets, which a bunch of them start wearing these jackets around everywhere. Crystal's got one of the jackets on here. The Black Knight in particular starts wearing this jacket all the time. He doesn't have it on the cover yet, but we see Crystal again on this cover. It's got the Avengers jacket with the Avengers logos. They're just these like bomber jackets that have Avengers logos on them, and I don't mind the jackets, to be honest. And actually, I don't mind this run at all. From issues 301 to from 301 to was basically like 414 or whatever the number is, which is the first issue of volume 3, the Kurt Busiek George Perez run. For that 100+ issue run, the Gatherer storyline this era from 343 to 375 is by far the best part. So it's not everybody's cup of tea. It's not doesn't rise to the level of some of the older stuff, but the Gatherer stuff is actually by far the best for this whole era of Avengers. The several years, this is the best storyline. So I'm going to talk a lot more about that next time. And basically, as soon as that storyline ends in 375, the book goes off a cliff like Thelma and Louise and explodes. And then it's just horrifyingly bad, starting with issue 376. That's something I'll talk about next time. But I've got a lot to talk about next time because I've also got a letter that was published in one of the issues coming up next time. And I got a no prize for something in the next batch of issues. So I was very involved in the fandom in this period as well. So we'll talk about that next time. But for now, let me know what you think down below. If anybody has any big thoughts or memories or feelings about this run of Avengers, please let me know, because that would be shocking to me. Because this stuff is just not that great. But I know that the Gatherers, Operation Galactic Storm people do have some firm opinions on. So let me know what you think about this stuff down below, and I'll see you next time.